What's up guys, and welcome to a special video that was only possible thanks to the contributions of you guys, the fans. Today we will go over some of the weirdest and most interesting tips and tricks discovered by you guys since the dawn of Rimworld. Now let's get into it. This first one was donated to the community a while ago by a user named Aschencone, who even did the honor of writing a wonder guide on how to do this on Steam. Linked in the description, go check it out, it's very good. There's actually more than what we're going to talk about here at that link. Anyways, this one has some crazy properties, but isn't so crazy to set up. First, make your normal double-walled air-locked freezer. Now, instead of placing walls by the second door, instead place coolers on both sides with the heat disappearing into the door. Now, remove the roof tile from that door and voila, you have a chimney. As Aschencone states in their Steam tutorial, doors are weird in Rimworld, and the temp in this room is about to be weirder. Negative 140 degrees. Anybody? Show that Anon was right about food being king. A good opening colony should have at least one pawn who is decent at cooking. After all, food poisoning can and will disrupt all plans, not to mention starvation is a pretty terrible way to die. However, I will slightly disagree. If you have a start that places you technologically in a mid-tier era, you can afford to not have a great chef, you know? You can afford to not have that in exchange for making a nutrient paste dispenser. This prevents all food poisoning chances, frees up a colonist from cooking duty beyond butchering animals, and can always have value even in the endgame. That being said, Eragon brings up a good point for the early game. Always save your components if you can. A very easy trap new, even veteran players fall for is using up most of their starting components before reaching fabrication. It takes 12 components to make a fabrication bench, not to mention the always looming threat of machinery breaking down, which eats into even more of your supply. My suggestion is to keep around 15 to 20 components at any given time before fabrication if you can. That way you can fix any machinery or know you can make a bench to make more. Alright. So, other advice I can give. Corners. Funny thing about Rimworld, corners aren't really needed in buildings. I know this seems like a little, but early game resources can be key to survival. Plus, with all that little extra space, you can fill it with all sorts of things. Turret, statues, well, walls. Wait, yeah. Sometimes it's nice to know that less can be more. But what about tips for real life? That brings us to today's sponsor, Brilliant, who's here with loads of tips and tricks for the real world. Brilliant is the best way to learn math, data science, and computer science interactively. Brilliant is fun and interactive with thousands of lessons, from basic to advanced, with new stuff added every month. Whatever your skill level, Brilliant customizes the content to fit your needs and lets you solve at your own pace. This month, I learned about data visualization using the course I learned how to better look at data and pull useful information from the data I've gathered on my own. It's always nice to learn something applicable to my daily life. What are you waiting for? Get started today for free for 30 days. And as an added bonus for the first 200 people that join, we'll get 20% off an annual plan by visiting brilliant.org/Noobert. Link in the description. Though speaking of walls, Hydroman brought up a really good point. Walls block explosions, and I know this is obvious, but I mean in the sense that they literally block all the explosion radius of a blast. Even if the wall is destroyed, everything behind the wall will be fine. I mean, in the small little space behind it, but the one pawn behind it can live to fight another day. At least till that second doomsday rocket nails him in the face. This is also why many veteran Rimworld players set up their turrets as a turret wall. If one turret blows up, it won't start the infamous domino effect of bringing down all your defenses. By the way, Hydroman has another good bit of small advice. Pawns can sleep in ancient beds. I know this one's kinda surprised me, but the ancient beds thrown into ruins if you have the royalty DLC actually are usable by pawns. Granted, they can't be moved, nor do they have quality. They can be invaluable for the early game since you don't get the sleeping spot on the ground mood penalty. And speaking on the subject of beds, NanoScream brings up another point. Don't waste stone on beds. Something people may not be aware of is that stone beds actually reduce the bed's rest effectiveness to 90%. With that, pawns will spend more time asleep and less time working. The only time I would suggest using stone beds is for prisoners, since hey, if prisoners continue to sleep, that's less time they are up to cause problems. Though, even then, that's a very situational reason to use subpar stone. However, the only exception to this rule is Jade. Jade must have made a few good deals behind the scenes to have this privilege, so perhaps use Jade for nicer beds and have a comfortable and stylish sleep for your pawns. Though, something else you shouldn't waste is gold. Gold is invaluable for advanced components amongst other things, and Eragon brings up a good point that using gold for furniture or art actually is wasteful. Price to beauty ratio actually is in favor of silver, more so since silver can be purchased from traders through normal gameplay. Gold is harder to come by. That being said, gold can be used as pretty nice tiles, giving a 12 beauty and 0.2 cleanliness. A bit overkill, but if you want your hospital to be gold and beautiful, go for it. Just remember the wealth issues when raiders come in for their human flesh and fresh organs tax. So, talking about building bases reminded me of Altamyr's good advice, namely about living in the mountains. That is one of the biggest issues of living in a mountain base, is the fact that pawns don't like to stay inside for too much. Drives them stir crazy, in fact. If you have an ideology, you can set it up so your ideologian loves underground, but then your pawns will get upset for leaving it. The best compromise actually is simple. Just make sure within your base there is a spot for open outdoor space. Good for outdoor recreation, mortars, and possible drop spots. I say because without mods, the game choices and drop spots can sometimes feel random. But what isn't random is what Jack X 4044 does. Seriously, a lot of people don't know this trick, so get in closer. Come on, get closer, turn up the volume, and boom. Kidding. Be a good spot for a jump scare. No, the trick is for finding space in mountains. If you suspect there might be an open spot in an unknown mountain area, rather than digging towards it, try this. Draft up pawns and select their weapons and kind of wave your cursor over the area. As seen here by our example, you can see how the cursor changes over solid rock and open space. Good way to douse for potential open space for the previous advice if you plan to make a proper mountain base. Alright. So, Altamyr has a pretty good bit of advice for defenses. Now, we all know that raiders will go for whatever you own in order to make sure you are upset. But did you know you can take advantage of this? Like a Yu-Gi-Oh player using scapegoats, you can use animals to lure and protect your colonists from raiders.
Activate the magic card scapegoat!
If you set up a small spot for your animals to roam in front of the exit of a kill box, you can lure raiders in as they are programmed to go for the easiest target. Can't get easier than your pets. Keep a drop spot of food, and that too will also lure them. Feed the animals, and more important, lure animals to it. So now you got easier hunting targets. However, do keep in mind this only works for normal animals that can be moved to specific zones. Pet animals won't work as raiders don't target them. Should also mention, or rather, MrPickleman mentions, raiders love to target fields and other outdoor electric equipment. If you plan to have anything outside, wall it up. Raiders will always go for that stuff before doors and walls. Makes sense if it's out in the open, will cause the problems, yeah. Cause you a lot of problems. And not mention, far more flammable than stonework protection. If you have to have stuff like geothermal generators out of the wall's range, then do yourself a favor and wall them up. Yes, you may lose power cables, but a bit of steel being wrecked over the whole machine and those components is a small price to pay.
A small price to pay for salvation.
Then we got XRunner55's advice for luring raiders. Oh yeah, beds not just good for Minecraft speedrunning, they can also lure raiders where you want them. All raiders, including sappers, seem to have a sort of sixth sense for beds and will go for them. So put them near the kill box and watch them go to their doom. Maybe include a bedroom nearby to actually have the bed be useful beyond being a lure. But let's say you don't get a normal raid, but instead a siege. Eragon Eragon brings up a good point about taking advantage of them, namely that you should let the siege do its thing and then up their mortar, then smash them with the wrath of 1,000 angry gods. The reason is twofold. One, if they drop their shells, you now got a good target for your shells. Always satisfying to hit that perfect shot and watch their shells take them all out. The second reason is to take their mortar and shells. That's some good supplies, especially in the early game.
Yoink! Hey!
It is a risky move though, since if you don't work fast enough, your base is gonna be shelled, but that risk might be worth a big reward later. Now, a lot of advice we have given involves picking fights, but this next bit of advice from Hydroman is about not picking fights. The Imperials of the Royal DLC may be jerks, but I do not recommend beyond certain playthroughs making an enemy of the Empire. First off, they are higher up on the technology scale. That means they're higher up on the food chain, and even if you think you can loot them for good gear, they thought of that. They will be equipped with either bio-locked gear or worse, acidifiers, so you don't even get anything but a corpse. I think making friends with the Empire is a good way to stay alive. A lot of their quests give good rewards. They tend to offer up gods for their missions, and if you are really lucky, they show up in a pinch to support you in your hour of need. Though, on the subject of royalty, some pawns are better at being royals, and by that I mean a royal pain in the butt. According to Eragon, greedy, jealous, and abrasive pawns will actually refuse a lot of work the higher-ups on the royal food chain they reach. While it might be thematic to give them that role so they can focus on, you know, royal things, I don't think that's a good idea in the long run. Instead, I suggest ascetic pawns. They keep all benefits of being a royal, but without those pesky demands. Guess it pays to be humble out on the rim, especially since royalty benefits can be good. As for those terrible pawns, I can think of a better play for them. Off to the dungeon with them. Maybe get eaten by a dragon while they are at it. Though suppose we should talk about some prison etiquette brought to us by Eragon and VictorStrumm. First off, a prisoner's mood actually can influence a few things. While a prisoner who is in a terrible state can have a crisis of belief, potentially making it easier to convert them to your ideology, that's kind of the only good thing. The best way to recruit prisoners is actually to treat them well. Beautiful and comfortable rooms, decent food that won't give them food poisoning, it does help. That being said, if you really want to make sure prisoners eventually join and not break out. What was that famous line? Ah, yeah. Sweep the leg, or in this case, remove them.
Sweep the leg.
Rimworld without mods won't actually let you remove legs, but you can bypass it by replacing them with peg legs and then removing them. But keep in mind that this also has drawbacks. Number 1, if your pawn isn't good at doctoring that medicine you waste and not mention risk losing a future colonist. Imagine messing that up so bad. Number 2, said future colonists will be harder to recruit due to the mood debuffs of being organ harvested. Yeah, they might dislike the people that chop pieces off of them. It's a thing. You gotta believe it. Number 3, your wardens will have to spend more time feeding them by hand. Well, can you imagine? Like, you crippled them. Of course you gotta feed them by hand. Still, if you want guaranteed recruitment, this is the slower method, no risk of breaking out. And that's a lot of good advice provided by the fan. Good to know I have such smart people watching us. Hopefully other people found this video helpful and taught them something new, cause really, the best way to make sure the rim is safe for us to organ harvest to our content is to help each other. I'd like to thank all the Patreons that make videos like this possible. We couldn't do it without you guys. If you would like to get videos like this, ad-free, early, and all that good stuff, consider donating. It's $1 a month.